You know, if you ask someone to carry a 50-pound backpack, they can probably do it. I mean, it might be incredibly heavy and it's definitely uncomfortable, but they will manage it for a mile or two.
Right. Adrenaline kicks in,
Hmm.
They lean into the discomfort, put their head down, and just push through the pain.
Exactly. But what if you ask them to carry that exact same 50-pound backpack every single day, all day while sprinting?
Yeah, that is a completely different story.
Right. And what if, while they are sprinting, you just keep randomly tossing extra 5-pound weights into it? Like,
Yeah.
eventually, no matter how strong or dedicated they are, their knees are going to buckle.
Oh, absolutely. And that buckling is exactly what we are looking at today with the school mental health crisis.
It really is. We are looking at a system built on individuals who are carrying just, an impossible weight.
Hmm.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into a document called The Clinical Backbone, Reinforcing School Counselors Through Partnership.
And the stakes here really could not be higher. We are drawing from the closing chapter of a three-part conversation, actually.
Yeah, and the earlier sections of this source laid out some incredibly stark data. Specifically, a staggering 48% gap in school mental health staffing across the board.
Which is just wild to think about. Half the workforce is missing. So to understand the practical solutions, we are also pulling in some very specific operational details from a provider called MentalSpace School.
Right. They offer comprehensive K through 12 mental health support specifically designed for Georgia schools.
Hmm.
And our mission today is to understand what the source material calls the human reframe.
Right, because if you are a parent trying to advocate for your kid or an educator navigating a shrinking district budget, you know the system is overwhelmed.
Or even if you are just someone trying to understand the incredibly complex mental health landscape for students right now, we want to see how a layered partnership model actually works on the ground.
Exactly. For districts that desperately need clinical depth but absolutely refuse to give up the trusted relationships their school counselors have spent years building.
So to really grasp the solution, we have to look closely at the reality of the problem first. The text points out that in many districts right now, a single school counselor is acting as the sole mental health resource.
Yeah, for up to 600 students at a time. 600 to 1.
Let us just visualize what a 600 to 1 ratio actually means on, like, a random Tuesday morning.
It is mind-boggling.
I mean, that counselor is managing academic scheduling, they are writing college recommendations, maybe breaking up a behavioral issue in the cafeteria.
And simultaneously, they are expected to be the frontline defense for severe clinical trauma, depression, and mental health crises.
Right. It is not a job.
Yeah.
It's just a constant exercise in emergency triage.
Completely. And when you factor in that 48% gap in staffing we mentioned earlier, you realize these counselors are not just putting out fires.
No, they are standing in the middle of a blazing forest with a single bucket of water.
They simply do not have the time to do deep foundational therapeutic work. Not when there are 5 other kids in the waiting room who need immediate intervention.
Okay, so let us unpack this. Because naturally, when a system is that visibly broken, the logical response is to bring in outside help.
Right, that is step 1.
But the text introduces a massive obstacle to this, and that obstacle is fear.
Yeah, a really deeply rooted fear.
The underlying fear in most of these partnership conversations is that an outside clinical team is going to come in and replace or undermine the existing school counselors.
Which is a totally understandable reaction.
It is like asking one person to be the emergency room triage nurse, the trauma surgeon, and the physical therapist for an entire town. But when someone finally suggests bringing in a team of specialists to help out, the triage nurse is terrified they are going to get fired.
That is a perfect analogy.
But wait, I have to push back here. So when the school counselor pushes back against an outside agency, is it really just job protection? Or is it something else?
Well, that is what is fascinating here. The source material validates that exact concern, but not as job protection.
Oh, really? What is it then?
It identifies this fear not as petty job protection, but as a profound protective instinct over the students.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Think about it. A seasoned school counselor might know a student's older siblings. They might know the family's financial dynamics.
They know that a specific tone of voice triggers a panic attack in third period math.
Precisely. That level of contextual trust is hard-won over years.
They really hold the institutional memory of that child's life.
Yes, and the text points out that the fear of an outside team coming in and acting like a bull in a china shop is entirely justified.
Because historically, that has represented the wrong version of a partnership, right?
Exactly. Outsourcing often means completely handing off the student to a stranger, completely severing the counselor from the loop.
So recognizing and honoring that fear, the fear of broken trust, is actually the necessary first step to that human reframe the document is trying to achieve.
So if replacing them breaks trust and leaving them completely alone leads to inevitable burnout and a buckling system, what do we do?
Well, the only logical remaining option is to somehow put a safety net directly behind them.
And that leads us directly to a pivotal quote from a district leader highlighted in the source. This leader said, "Partnership is not replacing our school counselors. It is giving them clinical capacity behind them."
Clinical capacity behind them. That shifts the entire visual from a model of replacement to a model of reinforcement.
It really does, and the text details exactly how this works through what they call the layered model.
Right, so in this setup, the school counselors stay right where they belong. They are the relational front line.
They remain the trusted face that students see first when they walk into the building, the person who intimately understands the culture and the daily pulse of the school.
But what changes is that an outside clinical team comes in to act as the clinical backbone supporting them.
And in this case, the text specifically looks at MentalSpace School, looking at their specific mechanics. That backbone is incredibly robust.
Oh, absolutely. First off, they are providing same-day teletherapy.
We really have to pause on that, because in the current mental health landscape, same-day access is almost unheard of.
Yeah, it is basically a unicorn.
Usually when a kid is in a severe mental health crisis, waiting 3 or 4 weeks for an intake appointment is the standard.
And a 3-week wait list for a teenager in crisis is an eternity. A lot can deteriorate in 21 days.
Same-day access allows the clinical team to capture the student inside the critical window of need.
Beyond that speed, they also provide dedicated therapist teams per school.
Meaning the school is not just routing kids to a random faceless call center somewhere.
Exactly. They are collaborating with a consistent team of professionals. They handle crisis intervention, suicide, and violence prevention.
And they even extend into staff wellness and family counseling. But there is also a major emphasis on the qualitative makeup of that team.
Right. The source specifically notes that the therapists are licensed, diverse, and culturally competent.
Which is absolutely critical, especially in a geographically and demographically diverse state like Georgia.
Having a clinical team that actually reflects the backgrounds, languages, and lived experiences of the student body really accelerates the trust-building process.
It ensures that clinical interventions are relevant to the student's specific cultural context, rather than a generic one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. Structurally, having a front line and a backbone sounds amazing.
Right, it sounds perfect on paper.
It sounds like the counselor is the general practitioner. You go to them when you have a stomachache because they know you.
And if they find an ulcer, they do not do the surgery themselves. They send you to the specialist, the clinical backbone.
Exactly. But how do the specialist and the general practitioner actually talk to each other in practice?
Ah, the logistics of it.
Because if a kid sees the outside therapist on a Tuesday afternoon for a severe anxiety episode, does the school counselor even know what happened by the time Wednesday morning rolls around?
That is a great question.
Legally, isn't there a massive privacy wall there?
That is the exact friction point that makes or breaks any external partnership. If they do not talk, you just create silos.
And nobody wants more silos.
Right. The text addresses this through a mechanic called coordinated care. And to your point about the legal wall, let us talk about why HIPAA and FERPA usually create a massive barrier here.
Yeah, break that down for us.
HIPAA A protects medical and therapeutic records, while FERPA protects the student's educational records. So historically, an outside therapist legally cannot tell the school counselor what is happening in a session.
Wow. So the school is just left completely in the dark.
Basically, yeah. But the innovation here is how MentalSpace gets the specific, upfront parental consent workflows in place so that the clinical loop remains completely legally compliant.
Okay, so they get the permissions sorted right at the beginning.
Yes, and that gives the counselor the updates they need. The clinical team handles the deeper therapeutic work, but they actively report back to the school counselor.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this legally compliant continuous loop of communication is the exact mechanism by which the school counselor finally loses that impossible weight.
Exactly. They do not have to carry the burden of doing the deep trauma therapy anymore.
But they maintain their crucial role in the student's life because they know to check in on that student on Wednesday morning.
Yes, so the counselor is not sidelined at all. They are actually empowered with medical context.
That is a brilliant theoretical framework. But, you know, a theory is only as good as its execution on the ground.
Very true. Let us look at how this layered model actually impacts the three main groups of stakeholders involved.
Right. We have the superintendents managing the district, the parents raising the kids, and the counselors doing the work. Let us start with the superintendents.
Good place to start.
Hold on. If a superintendent is trying to close a 48% staffing gap by hiring full-time in-house clinical therapists, they're not just paying salaries, right?
Oh, not at all. They are absorbing massive pension liabilities, healthcare benefits, and long-term HR overhead.
That would bankrupt most districts. Is this layered model a way to bypass that permanent headcount?
It absolutely is. For superintendents fighting constant budget deficits, this model is a revelation in resource allocation.
The math actually works out.
The text notes that this is how the math works for a district to get deep clinical support without expanding their permanent, long-term liabilities.
So they get the expertise of an entire clinical organization for a fraction of the cost of hiring dozens of individual therapists.
Exactly. And for the parents, this model provides immense reassurance.
Yeah, because the text emphasizes that parents need to know their child's school counselor, the person they already know and trust, is not going anywhere.
The familiar face remains. They're simply being reinforced with expert clinical support.
And finally, for the counselors themselves, this is how they finally get to step back from the edge of burnout,
They get to hand off the cases that require intensive, specialized clinical hours.
allowing them to effectively manage the rest of their caseload. And we actually have the hard data to prove this works.
Yes, the source provides some staggering outcomes specifically from MentalSpace School's implementation.
They report an 89% improved attendance rate among the students they work with.
Which is huge, but let us look at the mechanism behind that number. Why does a therapy partnership fix attendance?
Yeah, that seems like a jump.
It comes down to causality. A massive driver of chronic absenteeism is school refusal,
Right.
and school refusal is frequently rooted in severe, untreated anxiety or depression. When a student is having a panic attack about entering the building, punishing them for attendance does not work.
No, that just makes it worse.
Exactly. By providing same-day, culturally competent clinical intervention, you treat the root cause of the school refusal.
You stop the cycle of anxiety before it results in a week of missed classes. And the data supports this mechanism.
It does. Alongside the improved attendance, they show a 92% reduction in anxiety.
That is incredible. And they boast an 85% family satisfaction rate, which is incredibly high for school-based interventions.
It really is. And beyond the clinical outcomes, there are massive logistical and compliance wins here.
Right. The text mentions that MentalSpace School provides support for HB 268 compliance well ahead of the July 2026 deadline.
Let us define that, because state legislative mandates around school safety and mental health protocols are currently terrifying district leaders.
Yeah, HB 268 in Georgia, like similar legislation across the country, essentially mandates that schools have very specific documented protocols and resources in place.
Right, specifically for mental health interventions and school safety.
And for a district already stretched thin, figuring out how to build and staff these compliant frameworks from scratch is a logistical nightmare.
With massive liability if they fail. Partnering with an organization that already has the infrastructure, protocols, and HIPAA-FERPA compliance baked into their DNA entirely offloads that administrative terror from the district.
But I want to talk about the final piece of the puzzle, which might be the biggest hurdle of all for families trying to get help. The cost.
Oh, the cost is a huge factor.
The accessibility and insurance details provided in the source are frankly staggering. They accept Medicaid, and the cost to the family is exactly $0.
That is massive. That removes a monumental barrier for lower-income families who traditionally rely entirely on the school for resources.
Because private therapy is financially impossible for them.
Exactly. And for families not on Medicaid, they accept a massive list of major commercial insurances.
We are talking Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, AmeriGroup.
For district leaders or parents who want to see exactly how they structure this, the source lists their contact info as mentalspaceschool.com or via email at mentalspaceschool@chetherapy.com.
So what does this all mean? You hear all these insurance acronyms, and it can sound like dry administrative logistics.
But put yourself in the shoes of a stressed parent. You have a child in crisis.
Bridging the gap between the concerned school counselor who flags the issue and actually navigating a complex, bureaucratic insurance network to find an in-network provider taking new patients. That is usually the hardest part of the journey.
It really is. People just give up.
This raises an important question. What is the true definition of innovation in the mental health space?
We often think of innovation as discovering a new therapeutic technique or a new medication.
Right. But synthesizing all of this, true mental health innovation right now is about logistics.
It is about seamlessly integrating affordable, high-level clinical care into the daily, trusted environment of the school.
It is about doing it in a way that navigates the labyrinth of commercial insurance and Medicaid so the parent does not have to.
That integration, bringing the network directly to the school hallway, is the true innovation.
When you step back and look at what MentalSpace is doing here, it is a complete paradigm shift.
It really is.
We have spent this deep dive breaking down how a system moves from a 600-to-1 ratio of isolated panic to a fully integrated, legally compliant ecosystem.
It takes the pieces that already exist, the caring counselor, the skilled therapist, the complex insurance networks, and finally connects them
In a way that actually works for the human beings involved.
It is a profound shift from a model of isolation to a model of genuine, structured collaboration.
The trusted counselor acts as the relational front line, and the outside clinical team provides the heavy lifting backbone, communicating the whole time.
Exactly.
And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought that builds on everything we have just unpacked.
Go for it.
We have spent all our time talking about solving the crisis and treating the trauma. But imagine a school district where this layered model is just the standard baseline.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
If we successfully shift that heavy, impossible weight of deep clinical trauma work completely off the shoulders of our school counselors, what could they actually achieve?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If they finally had the time, the energy, and the emotional bandwidth to focus purely on proactive relationship building, career guidance, and catching minor issues before they become crises.
How much brighter could the future of those 600 students be?
Exactly. When you remove the constant need for emergency triage, you finally make room for actual growth.
It is a very inspiring possibility to consider.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will leave you to think about that, and we will catch you next time.